I hope my voice carries well in this room. I think it will. Okay. So thank you, Vin, for that glowing introduction filled with hounding and so on. Yes, I'll mention hounding again. I've been quite busy traveling, but thanks to Vin, he was quite persistent in asking me to come here. And I thought, I don't know if I can come. And I just said, okay, I'll do it. Let's just do it. And he won't hound me anymore. So persistence of Vin. Yeah. So as you can see, I work at UMS. I'm a lecturer there. And this is only my 6th year working for the university. I'm in my 50s. I'm 55 this year, I think. I always plus one because my grandfather was a Chinese. So, right? So after you get your birthday or day, then you tell yourself not to be disappointed growing a year older. You just graduate yourself for 1 year and then you're done. So, my 6th year working at university. Previously, I was an activist. I still am an activist. But along the way, spent years studying. So here I am today to share my knowledge with you all. Elaine, is that you? Hi, Elaine. I was like, I know certain faces. Okay, so I have a disclaimer always, right? The academics try to disclaim, especially with Dr. Chong here. So, for those who wanted a more cultural talk, I suppose, about how identity loss is because of cultural loss, and I don't meet your expectations, we have Q&A. So just ask me whatever I don't seem to cover now. But I'm really after this word identity. So I'll start by, telling you what I've been doing for the last 3 months, gallivanting here and there. I presented something at Ateneo de Manila recently, also about identity. Let's just say, when you're presenting to the crowd that you think is the, how should I say, one of the famous groups that will migrate to Sabah, and then you actually go there and talk to them, they are very humbled by the experience because they get to hear firsthand from somebody who's in the host country where many Filipinos come. So it was a good exchange. But I really want to start with telling you about my recent travel about 2 weeks ago to Singapore. So I was there invited by the Singapore University of Social Sciences and for a workshop, something obscure like sustainability and interdisciplinarity, whatever that is. But I'm not going to talk about that one. What I wanted to share is how they made us walk all over the city in the afternoon after lunch. So the whole purpose is, they said, we want you to, know about us and so on. So as I walk through the city, as you know, many fancy buildings there, I came across this building. I'm not sure if anyone has seen this building when they were in Singapore or if you were in Singapore, but we were actually going past Bugis Street and the textile center, some of the oldest landmarks of Singapore. And we went to see HDB flats and we walked back to our hotel. So this building is called Parkview Square. And for those who don't know, this building is in the style of Art Deco, and it is inspired by Gotham City of the DC comics, featuring Batman and Robin. Because if you see on the top, I can't show you now, but they are like statues of people holding something, and then further down here, there are more of that very Gothic-looking thing. I did not step in, but it would have looked like this. So more grand facade in there and so on. So, you must be wondering by now, why am I talking about a building, right? Why am I talking about building? And in particular, this building. Well, my colleagues and I from Singapore were discussing what heritage in a place points to, or can point to the people who were there, once there, and are there. And can we tell 50 years from now who were in Singapore, judging from the buildings that were left behind? Which group actually left their mark in there? So maybe 50 years from now, we have this idea that, somebody from Gotham City came and planted their building. So I won't go into details as to how my colleagues and I agreed to disagree, but I was very cheeky and said, I think Singapore's a bit like a museum. You have a lot of unique things here and there. And they were like, no, we're quite, original in some way. And then some of them said, well, cultures come through Singapore, and some do leave their mark, but many also travel through. In contrast, here's Sabah. The mountains in particular are classified World Heritage. Our rivers, our jungles, and wildlife all point to how Sabah is the epitome of nature itself. And we strive to maintain the heritage of this. So, which represents people more, buildings or nature? Nature. But can nature speak for us after we're gone, right? Yeah. So whichever it is that you choose, both have the capacity to inform who the people once were. For us here in Sabah, this is why it's so important to acknowledge the ancient cultures, the indigenous people who are there, who come from here, because they only come from here. So I believe that, even looking at our wildlife, for instance, will help to inform on, what were the stories like, the folklore, the beliefs, the rituals, and the everyday wisdom of the people in connection to the interspecies. So, you must be wondering now again, why the connection of all this? Well, we leave our mark behind in the world, don't we? But today we're trying to talk about identity. And my first question to you is, in a land so rich in culture, our Sabah, how can our identities be disappearing? So we in Sabah ourselves pride ourselves, right? We have so many cultures and groups and groupings. The official count is 40, but in 2007, the state attempted to do a sort of like asking people who they really are. Well, they asked them to self-report, so we came up with 100 or more, almost 100, but they never published that report because it was quite difficult, some of those self-reports. Some people saying, well, we're not the same group because we used to have a war with them, but they live in the same area. So it's very tricky how identity works. But then again, we come back to this idea of identity disappearing. So if we look at identity through, cultural lens, now I need water. Am I talking too fast? I think I am. So if we look through culture, that is the place where we understand that identity is visible because it's very compelling. We look for identity markers because we look for evidence of someone's identity. Language, for instance, if you can't demonstrate that, then you must not belong to that group, you must belong to the other group, things like that. And I actually need my glasses. I'm in denial. So let me put on my glasses here. So in the same token, if the leaders of a group say, language is our ideal marker, our ethos, then you must not change that. Those members who are weak in demonstrating that, they should not represent their community, or else they will keep the identity on the weak side, not very prominent in wherever, in society or even through culture. So inside communities, there's always this inner tension, but externally, we also struggle with becoming modern, becoming more cosmopolitan, and the sheer need to survive. So what do people do? They adapt. Adaptability becomes a form of resistance for communities so that they do not forget completely who they are. That's why we have hybrid festivals like this. A hodgepodge of people can take part in it because this is a form of resistance. So if you look at communities closely in Sabah, they are surviving this revival of traditional arts, bilingual education, hybrid cultural festivals like this is quite recent, September 2025. Community learning centers, NGOs, cultural activists, they're all there to try to sustain what we see as cultural identity. And here's the thing, they are warriors at home as well because they promote ordinary heritage. The mother or father who tries to speak the language to their children, the family that occasionally tries to cook some dish that they remember from their cultural traditions, their ancestors, teaching their stories to their children. These are all quiet forms of resistance and adaptation in which I concur with my Singaporean friends because there is a movement there to do ordinary heritage as well. So that's good. However, if we want our identities to evolve rather than to disappear, we have to make adaptability the key. And there is just no way to say this, but it's not betrayal if we choose adaptability, but is it also a strength or not? This is what we have to think about tonight. Yes, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to why identity disappears or how identity disappears. What is it about identity that it can disappear so? We already heard just now that it gets weaker a long time because we don't practice it enough or traditions change and so on. So what can make it really disappear? Before I go there, so apart from cultural traits that show us identity, we need to understand something about this thing called identity. It's a bit of a rascal, this thing, because number one, it's alive. And that means it's very dynamic. It cannot be fixed, really. Cannot be fixed. At best, you can take a snapshot of it and say, okay, this is how it was in the traditional past. And then now this is how it looks like in the modern times. So that's one. And then, of course, this is the perfect example of the Persatuan Sino Kadazan Dusun Murut, which shows the color blue to distinguish itself from your Kadazan look or your Dusun look or even your Murut look. And one can argue all the jewelry comes from here and there. And we can argue that it doesn't look authentic, but what is authentic when traditions change and culture evolves? If you look at just their faces, they look very happy to be Sino Kadazan Dusun Murut. So this is the society that they have formed for themselves. When I say it cannot be fixed, now I have to backtrack and say, well, what about in Sabah? No matter how we say, identity is very fluid, still we have leaders that say, you have to be true to your group. You have to be true to your ethnic identity. And it's enough to say that somebody out there will recognize that this is something fixed about you, something that academics like myself call inalienable. You cannot alienate it from yourself. It's already inside you somewhere. And for others, they will make this stick. They will insist that this must be your true identity. This must be your ethnic identity. And it's a symbol of your people, they will say. And enough for some groups to capitalize on that and to make that the status of their community, so that some groups are one higher or one lower down the rungs of society. So identity is alive, it's very real, even if it's conceived in our mind. And I come to this point about identity, it's ideological as well. Because as Benedict Anderson said, a famous anthropologist, it's an imagined community. People who are held together through symbols, documents, and stories without ever meeting each other. I have a perfect example, and we'll detour now to the Kadazan Dusun in Sabah. We have this in Sabah. So most of you already know the term Kadazan refers to indigenous people, predominantly from Penampang and Papar. So they say. But here, back when, in the 50s, the effort to unite these two groups was seen as a debate about naming and recognition. When it became official in the 1990s, the term Kadazan Dusun, suddenly you have this contesting of the name. Sorry, drink again. That it shouldn't be Kadazan Dusun. It should be Kadazan Dusun Murut. So you have KDM. What are the other acronyms you have to say? Because you know this. KDMR, what else? KDMP, and the list goes on. The list goes on and on. But Kadazan Dusun seemed to stick because at the time there was a promotion on the language, a standard language. So the standard language gave people a focal point to direct their imagination about Kadazan Dusun. At the same time, we can also say the Kadazan Dusun identity became, more clear to people because the two associations had signed an agreement: Kadazan Dusun Cultural Association and United Sabah Dusun Association. So there's an agreement in place. So people are not willing to rock the boat as it was. Today, some 30 years later, we have another name in the offering, and you can even say Sabahan can be one of those. That, if you will, suggest maybe we'll have these broader identities to play with, but the consensus building is still ongoing, and the support from the grounds needs to be stronger for either this or this, whichever. What can we learn from the Kadazan Dusun? What we learn is that something that is, people can reinvent the identity for something more cohesive, more united, for economic survival, for cultural survival, or both. And we also know that identity is easily adapted in social, political conditions. Labels can become more flexible to be inclusive and so on. So is identity really important to us if identity is this rubber band that we can keep stretching and keep minimizing and so on? It is elusive, ever-changing, fickle, and we wonder if it's important. But some of you may say, I'm not concerned about that. I want, get to the juicy part, Trixie, So here's the juicy part, my story for you. I just want to share something quite personal. So my brother passed away a few years ago, and I found myself going to the registrar near UMS, handing over his identity card. I handed it over, and as the officer took the card and said to me, "Puan, bersedia? Are you ready?" And I just, for a moment, didn't understand what that person was saying. We're going to cut this identity card now. So I said, okay, and she took it and cut it, said Bismillah and cut it. And for that moment in time, I said, wow, this is how, identity works. Once you're there, now you're not there. To the state, you're just a statistics, just a number in the ledger. That's the end, right? Yeah. But of course, the memory of the person goes on and so on. But I just thought, wow, when an identity dies, the state also waves goodbye. So ironic. Why am I sharing this story once again? It has a dark turn, this story, because um, a few years before my brother passed, we have a general election, and he came home. He worked overseas to vote. So the polling station is in Pinampang. So imagine his surprise when he came that morning and was told, Tuan sudah mengundi di Sandakan pagi ini. That's 300 kilometers away. So this is why I made a point to actually surrender his IC because of the breach on his identity while he was still around. So, with that, we, everyone, dear friends, it's not only happened to my family, but happens to others as well. Our ICs are not just documents, they're sites of contestation over belonging, recognition, who gets counted, and so on. And the predicament is that beyond phantom voters, beyond IC sold in black markets, the dubious papers, the fake adoptions, and so on, we have to remember we're in one of the most porous places on earth, I think. From Mangsi Island, or even closer, we're 14 kilometers apart. They also view the mountain as our mountain as a sacred mountain. I told my Filipino friends, I said, we're so close, but there's so much hostility sometimes. But I said, God forbid, if something should happen to Sabah, would you come and help us? Because we always see the other as the one that needs help. But when we become the other, who's going to help us, right? Anyway, that's my thread of humanity. Let's come back to the story. We have to continue on this track. Sabah is a borderland. And if you I always look at the map, and I said, if I was a big giant and I see Tawi-Tawi and Palawan as the skipping stones, I'll just jump across and here I am. I'm in Sabah. We're just so very near. And for all the people that our colonial masters brought over, including my grandfather from Hainan Island, most stayed, intermarried with locals and never went back and made more new hybrid communities and so on. So if we look into this and we ask ourselves today, those who were here and before and born here now, whether we truly fit in any of the boxes, that the categories that the state provides. And if we look at this carefully, and we'll see that we fit all of them and then somewhere in between. And that's the irony of it. We can fit everywhere, but not anywhere. So here, there's just not enough boxes for everyone, including the so-called illegal identities, because they're also mixed in with locals. One parent could be local, one could be a migrant, and so on. So, and furthermore, the border communities, the state will view all illegal until otherwise known. So that's another problem as well, because there are also local communities living there. So when we look at this whole picture, identities disappear now, not because that we become modern, not because young people stop speaking their languages or the adat fades, but their disappearance is not always about forgetting, but sometimes it's about being overwritten. The state is apt to redefine who counts as indigenous, Malay, other, because those who claim these identities change who they want to be from time to time, very susceptible to socio-political tensions. So whether politics or policy, entire lineages will disappear on paper, but their stories continue. So there's this lived reality and what's on paper. So my students will say this: it doesn't matter what people say you are. You should just, you should know yourself. And of course, I teach them this, right? And then they throw it back at me. That's, how good they are now. But then again, we say things like this because we want to go back to adaptability. We would like to justify that we don't choose this identity over the other because we're being adaptable. And that is our strength. We are trying to survive. But like I said, is it really our strength? We should not ask about adaptability anymore because it is about survival, but we should realize that our adaptability is also our greatest vulnerability. Because we are changing too much or not changing. We're just caught here and there. So nowadays, if you ask somebody, so what are you? This simple question, what are you? What are you? Are you sure? That's all? There you go. so that simple question of what are you is already not so simple for many of our young people. What more these sort of questions with the complexity of our porous state and our identities being from Nusantara and North and the high mixing that goes on here. So this is the complexity that I really wanted to show you tonight. And I want to end here with another sharing, if you let me. So I have been asked always by some officials, I would say, Trixie, can you just reclassify all these ethnic identities and then it will solve all these problems, That's one. And then, of course, my well-meaning friends, academic friends say, yes, Trixie, you'll be famous. You write up a new classificatory system and then, you'll sort out who are the new Sabahans and the natives and blah, blah, blah. So I always say no, because I know how naughty this identity is, the rascal, right? Well, one day, a few months ago, I was speaking to some youths who were being trained to be agents of change, going into politics and so on. So I put it to them, would you like to reclassify the identities in Sabah because of all this and so on? And what do you think the answer was? They just vehemently said no. And I suspect, because one of the topics I was talking about is cultural loss, I suspect that somewhere deep inside them, they feel like they haven't had enough time to know about their culture, their own culture, their roots, and that they were losing ground on those aspects. And that perhaps if they claim an identity, a new identity, because things will be shuffled, right? This would mean they have maybe given up, or how should I say, they feel scared about their future. So this is actually something that troubles our youth as well. So with that, I want to close, but not a traditional closing. Can I show you some slides as I close? So it's getting really blurry. I don't know why. Okay. Palest English better than sharpest memory. I say this because in ending, there's no way to tell how history will be kind to us or not if we don't also document ourselves. It cannot be only the state doing documentation. Should be Sabah Society, should be families, should be any one of us interested. we are becoming and unbecoming in this generation, in the next, and so on. So that's our reason for documentation. This is somebody. So taking the example of Wong Long, the ancestor, who married, I think he had another wife as well, but this is the wife Siapa, Kadazan, and whose son is Pungun, this man here, Antonius Pungun. So when it's the third generation down, we see that Lothar now wants to be known as Kadazan. No more Chinese, Sino, just Kadazan. And then the children, Joe, and then the great-great-granddaughter is now just Kadazan. So that's how the how should I say, ethnic identities can sort of disappear. We have this in many of the Sino Kadazans, including my mother. So birth certificate, Sino Kadazan. Identity can be Kadazan. How you identify, you can say, I'm Kadazan, I'm Chinese, I'm Sino. And then in census, suddenly you appear as Kadazan Dusun. Or you can be Chinese, or Sino, because then you say, I have a little bit of something. But in census, you're Chinese because ikut siang, right? Your last name. Or you're Sino Kadazan, you're mixed. Your identity card is Chinese because ada siang, last name. You identify as this. In census, you're this. But then you become Kadazan Dusun because you label switch. So this label switching phenomenon, in my research, I found that around 10, 15 years ago, you may know this, some of you may have friends, there was a kind of trend going on among Sino Kadazans to go to the registrar and ask for cabutan, lottery, which means that once their number is called, they will come to the registrar producing documents that will verify that they've been wrongly identified by a state official. So this is some informants say they are motivated by economics. They want to access Bumiputra status or rights, or get scholarships for their children, or get a 10% off for housing or something like that. Some of them really were terribly, how should I say, aggravated by the whole trend. So much so that families were internal fighting. Some wanted to change, some didn't want. So they get together, have a big meeting, and then they shout at each other. And then they said in one family, let's go and ask our relative in China. So they all went to China. And then they went to China, and then the relative said, why are you worried? I don't care if you're Russian or Muslim or whatever. You're still our relative. Oh, really? Okay, so they went back home and they changed their identity. So that happened to one family at least. But this is how, you can get the state to co-opt into your identity change as well. This is something Dr. Chong was trying to show me earlier. But the state, again, forgets us, overrides us. I always tell my students, okay, compare the two census and tell me what's the difference. And then they go, oh, you don't have this Kadazan Dusun, Bajau, Malay, other indigenous. They're gone. Are you sure they're gone? Oh, they might be coming under Bumiputra. And I said, oh, why do you think that happens? I don't know, they said. Well, we can assume maybe a statistician somewhere said, this looks like it's going to print a lot of pages. Let's just make, really nice and cute tables. But over time, this is quite recent. I think I searched this last night. We've become further reduced. There may be BICO now. I think in Singapore it was CMIO. That's their preferred. So Sabah is very populous, third. Many young people here, and I put this because election is coming soon. Should ask them all to vote, 33% of them. Here, of course, number one is still the most highly indigenous place, and Kunak being your quite mixed place. So in Kunak, no ethnicity is stronger than the other, very, very mixed. And then, of course, this is in Pinampang. This is also very recent, and you only have 4 ethnic group of citizens. Strangely enough, we do not have any non-citizens in Pinampang, according to this Department of Statistics Malaysia here. And interestingly enough, if you look at some of the profile sheets they come up with, what we understand a long time ago as PTI or PATI, now then non-citizens, they're not factored into the population as a whole. So where are they? You'll have 3.4 million now, 3.9, 3.4. Used to be almost 4, just over 4. Do you remember that statistics? 4.1 even, Dr. Chong, some years. Then suddenly you have this kind of whole chunk taken out, put somewhere aside, not addressed, but this is the one we're working with. So this is just behind UMS. One of my project sites are there, and that's where I found that everyone's mixed in. In this kampong, Numbak, Dusun people live there, Filipino people live there, all kinds of people live there. And I show this picture as well because also when it comes to culture, you guard the border so tightly, boundary so tightly, and it's by looking at the boundary that we understand who belongs as well. So for this particular group that wanted to celebrate Kamatan Islamic the other day, I think this was not more than 10 years ago, the comments were, you cannot mix a pagan tradition, so-called pagan tradition with Islam, Islamic prayers and so on. So this kind of syncretism is not seen as favorable in the eyes of the public. Keep it more Kamatan looking and so on. But this group still does their own Kamatan Islamic. But in giving them voice here, I would like to say that this is a creative expression of their culture, if not their soul. So this is, for me as an anthropologist, very nice to see the diversity in there. And last but not least, this picture again. After so many years trying to study this thing, I think I've been studying identity, ethnicity, culture for maybe 25 years or more. I thought of who I am, I started as an activist for Kadazan Dusun language and so on. And then over time, I get challenged, who am I? And people don't understand what I'm talking about, especially overseas. They just, because ethnicity is not something for them. For us, it's very profound, very deep and nice to unearth all the time. So, because of the challenge, sometimes I wish, like some people who say, if you can, get somebody resurrected from the dead, who would it be? And some people say, Elvis. Okay, that's not me. But at some point, during my PhD, I said, gosh, I wish I can speak to Tun Fuad Stevens and ask him, why did he do all the things that he did? But I came to this point now that if I were to describe Sabah, what are we? It feels like we are where the sand meets the shore. We're just getting radically washed up, changed. Sometimes the tide is gentle, but other times it's quite rough and so on. So once again, may history be kind to us. And in the land of disappearing identities, that's my greatest wish. So happy to take questions. Thank you. Yeah.